Hello and welcome to Open Mind UFO Radio. This is your host Alejandro Rojas, and I have a great show today. However, to start the show off and to talk some news, I do have with me Mr. Martin Willis of Podcast UFO.
Yo, hello.
How's it going?
Good.
So
spring is in the air. Spring is in the air.
I know, it's great. The weather's getting better, and everything's looking up for at least weather-wise. But and I've got a show, so I've been gone for a few weeks. I apologize to the audience for that, but there was vacation time. And you know what I really wanted to focus on, and that's where I got my guest on, is the Scientific Coalition for Ufology, that conference that went on, the AAPC. Some of you know I've been involved with the SCU, and so I really wanted to focus on that and what was going on there, to digest it, and to capitalize as much as possible on this event. And this event became, to me, more important than I even thought. But we'll talk about that. First, though, I want to talk to you about my guest. My guest is Dr. Kevin Knuth. He is from the Department of Physics, a professor there, an associate professor at the University of Albany, also known as SUNY, the State University of New York. So kind of a big deal. And he has also worked at NASA as a NASA research scientist. He's a professor of physics. He teaches space, all kinds of really cool stuff. And he had a great talk. So we're going to talk to him about science and the UFO topic. And then we're also going to talk to him about this kind of idea that he put forward in the conference. It has to do with kind of space-time when it deals with space travel, and this idea of how, time may be very different for whatever may be visiting us. So from that perspective, it could answer some of the questions as to why what we see when it comes to the phenomena is so enigmatic. So we'll talk about that with our discussions with Kevin. But he was so great. He was a great presenter. The SCU is going to have his talk up eventually here as a prepare it. But it was really good.
Wow, I can't wait to listen. I love this kind of stuff. I can't wait to listen. There have been, in my opinion, very few very serious science-oriented conferences. And you and I met at one in North Carolina. Right. That's where we first met. And I think Leslie Kane was kind of the main person to organize the speakers. And of course, she's very credible. She's behind the December, 17th, 2017 article that, the Pentagon thing came out. 16th, right. And so she was the perfect person to put this together for Ken Center, who was part of MUFON over there, and that was a really great event. But this felt like that, if not better. It was a very science-oriented, small group, very intimate, but it was really incredible to have such a high level of credibility, of experience. Some of these speakers had multiple PhDs, and to be talking seriously about this topic, ideas around this topic and how to move forward. And then to have Luis Elizondo there to also share this information with these guys, to add to that conversation. And Hal Puthoff was there the whole time. It was, it was a really incredible event, very important. And, there'll be more information coming out about the talks as time goes on. Wow. I really wish I could have gone there. I was contacted by a few people that were going, and I really wanted to go, but I had just got back from, 6 weeks away. So
yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So, but we do have some of our listeners, were there. So others have shared. And, Kevin and I go over this. There's been a little bit of criticism because there has been some information that has gotten out. And the SCU has been like, hey, guys, you didn't have permission to get that information out. So please don't share that, which is completely fair thing to ask. So there have been people frustrated with that, saying, hey, they're trying to edit this information, or at least be controlling with the information. And you know what, people? That's how professional organizations work. Really, pretty much every event I go to, I'm invited at for press. Some of these cool things that I get to go to, NASA facilities and stuff. There's always information that is embargoed, information I can't share for maybe a few days, maybe a few weeks, maybe a few months. And then there's often information that they want off the record. And so you can't share that at all. And of course, with me speaking with all of these different individuals, the more, I guess, professional, the more credibility, or kind of the more, like Alexander talked about with risk aversion, the more professional the person, the more sensitive an area they're in, the less they're going to be more careful about the way they speak with this, because they don't want to hurt credibility amongst their peers. And so Kevin and I talk about this, and working and writing with scientists, and we often have these discussions when I have these meetings with scientists and stuff, off the record discussions. There's a difficulty they have with working with the media, because their information is they can't get it misconstrued. When you're a journalist, if you get something they say wrong, that can have a very big effect on them, because it may get out there that this scientist is misrepresenting their work, or is doesn't understand the science correctly, and then they lose credibility. So it can be very impactful. So when you're working with these sorts of people, how you release and what you release is extremely important. And at least it's my position at the SCU that we be very strict about it, because we want to make this safe environments for scientists. So that's why that information is metered. And to be completely honest, and I don't mean to be disrespectful for anybody listening who shared information they shouldn't have, it is actually very unprofessional not to get permission to share information before you share it. If you're truly trying to help this cause, you'll definitely want to do that, because some of these people, like our guests today, they may we may share something that is very detrimental to their career, and then they'll never want to participate in this topic again, because they don't feel there's a safe professional space for them to do this work in. So that's why it's so important that information be carefully managed.
Can you give a quick example of what type of information was shared that shouldn't have been?
Well,
and not details of it, just something they said, or
I'll say this. I'll say, here's for instance, Elizondo didn't really want the Q&A shared, because he shared most of this is not necessarily around being inaccurate, but he was kind of, I think, teetering on the edge of what he can share as far as the History Channel show that's coming up, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But also, he commented on personal, things about his family and stuff that he really didn't want to share, because as we all know, as you and I know, everything we say on these shows is scrutinized. And anything that we say can be used in social media to attack us or make fun of us or what have you. And it's unfortunate. It's not justified, nor is it professional or even, copacetic in any way. But there's a lot of mean people out there on the internet. So, and there has been blowback and personal kind of effects that he has experienced from people just being very cruel, and then the family seeing this and being like, oh my gosh, what are these people saying about my dad or something, You probably get that, I feel, what are people, I rarely see people saying something bad about you in particular, but certainly other colleagues, you hate it. That's when I get more mad, when people are being mean or unjustified and bashing some of our friends or colleagues or other people in this field. So that's the sort of thing. Yeah. But otherwise, what can even hurt more? And we'll get into this with Kevin, actually, and get into this topic and what he's written in just a minute when we get into the news. But I'll kind of talk about this some more, and Kevin and I will talk about it some more, too, later in the show.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Wow.
SCU-wise, though, because you weren't there, are there any questions I can answer? Were there any burning questions you were like, I wonder if this happened or that happened? Or
yes, I know they discussed, or Robert Powell discussed the Nimitz case, but were there other cases that were discussed in depth like that?
No, that's a great question. Well, I shouldn't say that. Yes, there were 2 cases that, in particular, that were covered because they've been thoroughly researched by the SCU, and that was the Aguadilla case, the Puerto Rico Homeland Security video case, and then also the Nimitz case. Because, as you know, because you're one of the few people, Robert's even told me he would rather wait for the report to come out to talk about it. And we will have a video up eventually to talk about, the findings that Robert Powell and Peter Reality came up, or Relati, I keep messing up his last name, but I came up with. So it's just mostly those 2 cases. Otherwise, it was more general. So, for instance, with Kevin, he kind of his analysis of time, space, and space flight and how that would affect perspectives. Or, another Taylor, Travis Taylor, really, charismatic guy. He came up and talked about, he's got 2 PhDs, talked about what if aliens attacked, what would we do? And this is something he's written a big book on. So it is speculation, but it's, he's really done a thorough analysis like we would do with a foreign adversary on what might happen. So really interesting stuff there too.
That would be interested to know what his thoughts are. If alien attacked us, what will we do?
Great talk. So we'll have that up. At the SCU site.
I would join them. We know what else to do.
I, for one, welcome our new alien overlords.
Yeah.
Yeah, you would.
I would, yeah.
All right, so before we get into that, let's talk news. So what would you like to start off with, buddy?
Well, it's not news so much as just an interesting story. It's in Forbes. And Aidan Gillen from the new, Project Blue Book. Not so new. There are several episodes out now.
First season's over. And you know what? He's a great actor. I think he did well personally with Hynek. He made him very likable. I do have my criticisms of the show, and my final review is going to be posted any second now, by the way, so I'll share that. Accuracy was out the window. It's got worse as time went on. But it was still an entertaining show, and I think Aidan Gillen did great. What did you think?
I think, he's absolutely he just becomes such a focus and such a, you want to like him.
Exactly, yeah.
And I think he's great. I think he did the part really well, and I think he really took care to make sure he did. When I spoke with Dave O'Leary, he'd say that he'd get a call from him, what would your dad do if this happened? That type of thing. So he really did have, he really had care to do the portraying as accurate as possible in a given situation.
Yeah, I agree. So
anyway, the story is called that he talks UFOs in his new show, Project Blue Book. And pardon me. And so it talks about the 10-episode drama series based on renowned astrophysicist Dr. Joseph, I didn't know that was his first name, J. Allen Hynek, who studied UFOs. And it had quickly become one of the top shows of the year, which I think that's pretty nice. I think it was in 3-something million viewership or something like that. It probably even says it somewhere in this story. So it basically talks about the relation of the UFOs reported through the United States Air Force from 1952 to 1969. Over 12,000 of them were reported, but it talks, again, it starts getting into the Irish actor, and by the way, he really lost his accent very well, Aidan Gillen, and they say in this article that they think he brilliantly plays Dr. Hynek. And, of course, you would remember him from Littlefinger from Game of Thrones, if you ever watched that. So in a phone interview, he discussed how it differs portraying a real person as opposed as a fictional character. And he says it's both daunting and exciting, though more so exciting. And it isn't the first time he's delving into a real person on screen, but he explains the the differences and all that. So they go on to ask him about UFOs. And is he a believer or not? And he says, I'm quoting here, I've seen a couple of things. He says he describes a time when he was with friends and they saw something in the sky they couldn't explain. And he said this wasn't long after seeing the 1977 classic Close Encounters of the Third Kind. We were all kids and we saw something inexplicable. It was also at a time that we were really looking for something, and I totally understand that. Also, he adds that his mother saw something in the 1950s in rural Ireland, and that was a time when UFOs were the topic of conversation on TV and on the radio, and people were really looking for them and wanted to see them. And he believes that it's quite improbable that we're alone in the universe, which is... wait a minute. Did I read that wrong?
Yeah.
I believe that it's quite improbable. I'm sorry, improbable that we're alone in the universe.
Yeah, he said it kind of strangely, but you got it.
Yeah. And it's highly likely that there are other civilizations. I think most people in our society today are feeling that way as time goes on more and more.
Mm-hmm. I would really love to talk to him like I did with Michael Malarkey. Michael Malarkey, for instance, didn't think much about the topic, really. And then when he got involved with the show and he read like Ruppelt books, the Blue Book chief, who wrote a book on Project Blue Book, he was like, oh my gosh, there's just so much evidence that there's a real phenomena here that his involvement with the show is what convinced him. And I wonder if that's the same way with Aidan Gillen. It seems as though, but I wonder if it is.
Well, he had a little bit of a jump on the topic to begin with.
Yeah, with his sightings, true. Yeah, so that's a great article in Forbes.
Right.
So a couple other articles. Actually, I have a couple articles that kind of answer your question too, to how can information get misconstrued. So we have this article from Kevin Knuth, who we're going to hear from in just a second, at least about him, that came out fairly recently. And the title is, Ex-NASA Scientist Says That UFOs Are Real and the Government Covers Up Alien Life. That's the Tech Times headline, which is completely inaccurate. They're talking about Kevin Knuth, and what happened is for, UFO Day, June 2nd, I think, or July 2nd is the day. There was someone who asked, they were asked at the university, would someone like to write an article about UFOs? And he said, sure, I'll do it. So he wrote an article for The Conversation, and the title is, Are We Alone? The Question is Worthy of Serious Scientific Study. So he's making an argument here that we should take the potential, the UFO phenomena seriously and look at it. And it's a great article. This article actually originally came out in like June of 2018. And then I think because he was speaking at SCU, there's been, the tabloids even picked up this story and wrote about him recently. But they did kind of, not get things right. And that's the hard part. He is not saying there's a major cover up. In fact, if you read his original story, he says, by not sharing information, it makes it look like there's a cover-up. Right. And he also says by scientists who are skeptical coming up with ridiculous debunking theories for UFO incidents, he says that also hurts and gives the impression that there's a major conspiracy. Because you and I complain about that often, that, the skeptics will say, oh, I can answer A and B out of a whole list of 7 or 8, pertinent facts, and so they can blow it off because they feel they can answer 1 or 2 aspects.
Right. It was Venus because it's in the sky.
Right. Yeah. Right. It's one of the frustrations, even with the Agua Dia report, there was a light coming out from the ocean over towards this airport in Puerto Rico. The Homeland Security guys, are actually Border Patrol, essentially thought, is this a drug runner? It looked low. They aim their camera on it and they get this object. The light turns off, but they can see the object in their FLIR, at night. They're infrared, essentially. But a lot of people throw that out the window and say, in this infrared, I can tell this, I can tell that. But they throw out the witness testimony and the reason why they're looking in the first place. It's an example of how, if you don't take all the information, then you're not really examining the entire facts of the case.
Did they talk about that from the beginning? Because I only heard that part of it a month ago about the light.
Well, here's the other issue. And this is another example why you need to be careful with the way you get out information. In fact, Elizondo said something great, and I love it. He said, we're not here to satisfy idle curiosity. He said, I understand you guys people out there want information as quickly as possible, and we want to get it to people as quickly as possible, but not at the detriment of the case or what we're trying to accomplish here. We're not going to, to jeopardize the case to satisfy idle curiosity. And I totally agree with that, because this is an example with Agua Dia. If you don't have all of the pieces of information in total, then the case isn't as substantial. And that was something that I think that just it gets lost in conversation. People don't, take a step back. Here's another example. I tweeted, and it was being a little bit ornery, that Elizondo said ATIP was 100% UFOs, because some people are doubting that out there, because they say, well, we don't have a government document that says that. Well, so what? I mean, here's why nobody cares. Here's why only these really kind of ornery people in the UFO community, some will get frustrated with me saying this, but this is the truth. Here's why they're the only ones who care. Because we have the guy who got the funding for the program saying, yep, we created this program. I sought this funding to investigate the paranormal, including UFOs. We have Lou Elizondo, who ran the program. It's verified he's ran the program, saying this was 100% UFOs. We have Hal Puthoff and other BASS employees who were contractors with the project, saying, yes, we were looking in UFOs. What more do you need? These are the people working in the project. They've already explained how, when they described the project, or when they, the project goals on paper had to be enigmatic, because they didn't want people to bash them for being some kind of UFO group. So they had to kind of hide the wording or play with the wording so it wasn't obvious. So it's obvious that we wouldn't, that we're seeing what we're seeing in these documents. Given we need more documents, and it's always good to be skeptical. But for the common sense person out there and for the media, okay, we have it confirmed from everybody involved with this program, high level credible people, that it was UFOs. Fine, it's UFOs.
Now, what are the critics saying? That
they're essentially saying that the documents don't say UFOs. They use terms like advanced aerial threat, identification of foreign threats. All of this, which is, veiled terminology for what is a foreign threat, and an unknown object is also a foreign threat. So, which is what Elizondo said. And, we investigated those, in particular looking for those which exhibited technology or performance that we can't achieve ourselves.
Right.
But anyway, yeah, so that's sort of the problem that gets in there. But it's a great article. Another example of this is a Montana Tech professor who recently talked about how hypothesized that UFOs could be from the future. What is the headline? MT Tech professor claims UFOs are time machines from the future. What is his quote? His quote is that it's potential, that it's a possibility. He's not saying they are. In fact, he even says maybe. So it's just, this is an example where, their words, even a slight change can have a problem. But this is a really interesting article about this professor who's saying, this could be a possibility. And what's great about the article more so is he's saying, we as professors and scientists and academics need to take a look at this field. And, there could be some answers like this. How interesting would this be if, we're witnessing people from the future? So right. Another great article, and I'm going to go through these other ones really quickly because we've ran out of time. But there's one in an article in a website called The Outline. Belief in aliens could be America's next religion, something I've been talking about too, and I love. And this is based on Diana Pasulka, her new book that came out kind of talking about some of this stuff. Really interesting article. A War History Online article about Foo Fighters. So this is really cool. Researched article on that. And this is a Forbes article. So at the same time as our event in Alabama for the SCU, there was another somewhat similar event happening in France and Paris. And this is something that happens yearly. It was actually Monday the 18th, where a bunch of scientists got together to talk about aliens and UFOs. In particular, scientists meet to investigate the Great Silence. In other words, Fermi's paradox. Why are we not seeing aliens? And a lot of these scientists are seriously hypothesizing things like the zoo hypothesis, that they're just coming here to look at us, or a galactic quarantine, that we are dirty apes and we, can't be trusted to go out there in space. So, just another scientific conference where they're looking at these things that happen in Paris. So this is a great Forbes article. And then finally, you all may have seen the last episode of Project Blue Book, and it was about the Washington, D.C. sighting. So there's some great articles that even quote myself that the History Channel had put out there on the 1952 encounters over Washington. And those are good. These History Channel articles are well researched. They are fact-based, even if the show isn't. So the history articles are great, and I highly recommend people read those articles. I think they do a pretty good job of covering all the UFO cases, the real ones that were in the television shows. And, there are allusions to other UFO cases in the Project Blue Book show. And if you want more about those, you're going to have to read my reviews, because I don't think everybody catches those other UFO stuff. And I know David O'Leary, the writer, is a UFO buff, so he is definitely aware of what he's doing when he makes these other references. So there's probably many I miss, but at least the ones I catch, I write about and provide information on in my reviews. And I'll have my last review coming out real soon here.
Great. Wow. We really went over time.
Interesting news, huh?
It's great. Yeah, packed full.
Well, thank you so much for joining us.
You're very welcome. My pleasure.
Let's go ahead and talk with Professor Kevin Knuth. I am very happy to welcome for the first time to the show Kevin Knuth. And am I saying that correctly?
Yes, that's correct. It's the Scandinavian pronunciation, so that's right. Thank you.
Okay, great. So there are other types of pronunciations as well, huh?
English, where the N would, yeah. Yep.
Okay. Well, it's great to have you on. It was very great to see you at the SCU, Scientific Coalition for Ufology conference. All of the names and everything are a mouthful. The Anomalous Aerospace Phenomena Conference. And I guess we could start off there. So you are a scientist, a professor, and one of the things that we got a lot of feedback for, they had feedback for when putting together the conference, was the naming. And really a lot of advice to shy away from and stay away from the term UFO. And I was wondering, is that something you would recommend as well? So they use this term, anomalous aerospace phenomena, which is great. It's an accurate term. But do you see that issue, with your colleagues?
Yeah, potentially. The terminology is always difficult because some terms carry a lot of extra baggage, or sometimes in science they'll have common meaning, which isn't quite the same as the scientific meaning, and that can lead to confusion in some cases. So I don't know. I think that, UFO is a pretty charged term at this point, and it might help to come up with more precise terminology, and then it may not.
Mm-hmm. Now, in your experience, especially online, this was kind of interesting. I wonder if you saw this. People seem to be very concerned about you and your reputation getting hurt, or you having to kind of hide from your interest or your participation in this conference, worried that, you may suffer negative repercussions in your career. Did you have those fears or concerns?
I have had those concerns, and I would continue to have those concerns. I have a pretty solid reputation at this point, an international reputation, so I would hope that would carry some weight. And my interests in this have always been clear, so I think that this is something that should be studied. I don't have any statements about, as to what the solutions are yet, and I think that scientists should study things. I think it's that simple.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you have, or at least there are a lot of important people, I will say, or other scientists kind of coming out, and it seems like we have this environment where scientists feel a little more comfortable to go to the potential alien explanation. For example, what you refer to the Dyson sphere, and there's been a lot of talk about, Tabby's star, the Oumuamua thing that came through, this Harvard scientist suggesting it could be alien spacecraft. It seems like there is a little bit more of an acceptance of at least entertaining the idea that there could be other civilizations out there trying to come take a look at us.
Yeah, I think that's correct, and I think there's a good reason for it. If you think about the year 1947, which is when Kenneth Arnold, saw saucers near Mount Rainier, what was 1947 like? Well, this was 10 years before Sputnik, and in fact, even 2 weeks before Sputnik, you had the Royal Astronomer in Britain declared that space travel was bunk, and that was 2 weeks before Sputnik. So 10 years before Sputnik, we still weren't really considering space travel as a serious possibility. Not everyone was sure it was physically possible. We didn't have a great deal of knowledge about what the planets in our solar system were like. And we didn't know at all whether there were any other planets around any other stars. We assumed there probably were, but we didn't have any information about that at all. So 1947, the idea that there could be advanced civilizations from other star systems visiting Earth was just almost off the table. Mm-hmm. We just didn't have that kind of knowledge, and our worldview wasn't prepared to accept something like that. Now you fast forward, 70 years or so to this point in time, and now we're looking at, we ourselves have visited other planets. We've put men on the moon, we've launched probes to the major bodies in our solar system, and we've got, 2 space probes, the 2 Voyager, the craft and the Pioneer craft actually are both leaving the solar system at this point. And moreover, we have plans ourselves to visit the nearest star. We're aiming to get to Alpha Centauri by 2069. This is one of the goals that NASA has. So we are working toward interstellar travel ourselves. And more even, and to add to that, we also now have knowledge about planets around other stars, and we're learning about them. So I think the situation's changed, and we now have a better picture of what the universe is like, and realize that, we are a civilization that really is attempting to do this, and we have had some success at this point. So it's not unreasonable to accept the possibility that there may be other civilizations out there that may have tried to do this as well with varying degrees of success.
Mm-hmm. And another aspect to it that I think it actually is important, and it may seem silly, but, being a journalist who's gone and covered a lot of science and NASA, this is kind of a big deal, is how do we outreach to the public? And it's fun. Like, for instance, when you're presenting about this and making your postulations it's fun to think about this stuff, and it does serve a scientific purpose also. It's speculation based on science.
Yeah, it is fun, and I think this is how breakthroughs are made. You go back to the late 1800s when Robert Goddard was in his cherry tree and was thinking about launching his model rockets, and imagined what would it look like to have a rocket that would launch from this meadow and go to Mars. It's a fun thing to speculate, but what did that lead to? That led to the development of liquid fuel rockets, which led to the moon missions and Mars missions. At this point, we have groups now seriously considering the possibility of colonizing Mars, and so this is 100 years later. So I think these, imagination is an important part of that drives our interest in science. Now, of course, imagination affects our advancement, not necessarily that of anyone else, but it could serve to inform us as to how to perhaps detect spacecraft moving through interstellar space from star to star, and how to look for civilizations on other worlds and things like this. And this is interesting.
Mm-hmm. Another question I have for you before we move into kind of the topic of your presentation at the event was at the AAPC, the Anomalous Aerospace Phenomena Conference. I guess, what was it like for you? For those of us who have been involved, I've been involved with helping this organization grow from the beginning, and for us, it was very exciting to have. There have been scientific oriented organizations before, but what's great about this group is it's a lot of doers, people who have been in the business, let's say, for decades working on this mystery, but also they, in the past, the scientists involved with this field have not been enthusiastic about sharing information, more of research. But what's great about this group is it's more looking towards also sharing information with the public, which is exciting. So it was an exciting event for us, and great to have you involved. How was it for you?
Oh, I was very very excited about it, very interested in attending and meeting some of the people there to find out what work has actually been done, what data has actually been gathered, what the possibilities are for future investigations, and I was glad to be surrounded by scientists, people who are actually interested in studying this and actually using a careful methodology to look at the data at hand, as sparse as it is. And I had several interesting conversations of what could be done next, and I look forward to working on some of this.
Mm-hmm. Was any of the information surprising to you, just as an outsider, especially related to Luis Elizondo, and that, the Pentagon was working on some of this and what they were looking at?
Yeah, some of that was quite surprising. He mentioned a few things, I think, during the Q&A that will be coming out in May during the History Channel's docuseries. So I don't want to mention anything specific, but I was kind of shocked as to some of the encounters that he described. It would be very exciting to get some real data on that, to get high quality visual images as well as infrared images and radar data, and possibly even spectra. That would be very exciting. And so I'm hoping at some point that some of that data will be released.
Mm-hmm. And I guess when you see that, I guess how does it make you feel as a scientist, someone interested in space? I mean, it would seem like you would be as excited as the rest of us. It's pretty exciting.
It's exciting, but at the same time, it's frustrating. At this point, they are. Let's see. I don't quite want to use this word, but because it's not not quite accurate, but they're still stories that you hear from people. Now, these are very reliable people who, if they're joking around or lying, it's costing us, tens of thousands of dollars easily, maybe millions of dollars. So it's a big deal. So they're people I would tend to believe, but they're pretty fantastic stories when pretty fantastic accounts when you really get down to it. You get an idea of what speeds these things are moving at through the air, but you don't have any sonic booms. They can come to a sudden stop, and you don't have a heat dump, which you would expect to have. In fact, Peter Reale in his talk estimated the amounts of energy involved, and you're talking, several kilotons of TNT going off per second, for some of these craft, which, those were his estimates, which I think are they're ballpark estimates, but they're about what you would expect for this type of behavior. So the accounts are surprising, and so, yes, it's very exciting at one level, but as a scientist, it's also frustrating because I would like to see real data. I'd like to see, radar data so that you can get much more precise estimates of the velocities and accelerations and things like that.
Mm-hmm. Which makes sense. That makes perfect sense. And then I guess one last comment on the conference itself is to encourage the participation, or to make it kind of a safe space for someone like yourself who's embedded in the scientific community and academic community. How do we make a safe space for people like yourself to speak on this topic? Because obviously you've put some thought towards it. Your presentation showed that.
It's difficult to do. I think that one of the things that I saw happening was that information was being released pretty much immediately from the conference to the internet. The internet, as we all know, is a pretty hostile place for pretty much anybody. so it's, you can't control the information once it's released onto the internet. And so it's a difficult balance. You've got people who really want to know, and share this information, and I really appreciate that. But at the same time, you have, if you want scientists to speak and tell you what they know, you have to make them feel secure. Now, the difficulty is that different scientists are going to feel differently, and people are going to feel. Some people are going to be more willing and more open, to talk about what they believe and what they have figured out, and other people are going to be more reticent. And I think the first thing to do is to really respect those differences and not second guess them and judge them. I think that the public community has come to believe that everything is some kind of secret conspiracy, and that there's always some ulterior, nefarious motive behind, somebody's statements. And I think that's difficult. It's in the long run, they're going to shoot themselves in the foot, because if you want people to be open, you need to make them comfortable and listen to them. So I think that's really all there is to it.
I think that you make a really good point. And what you're saying is important, because one of the things that we have been experiencing is this, people being excited to release information and releasing it without permission or prior to when they were supposed to, which is one of the reasons that the group, was so careful with who was coming in and that area. So I think the group has to be more careful with the sharing of the information and its lessons learned. But you make a great point, and I think that it'll be incumbent on us, and I think my listeners will understand, to go the route you're talking about, being more careful with the information, even if it frustrates the audience, because I've learned this too as a journalist. When you cover scientists, it's extremely difficult, and I think that's why so many journalists get it wrong. They just don't have the patience to work with scientists, and scientists don't always make it easy because they are very careful about the way that their information, communicating scientific information, especially when it comes to research or theory, is so nuanced and complicated. And one misstep can cause a very big misunderstanding, which causes problems.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly right. And in fact, if you go back and read earlier scientific papers, even from the early 1900s, so read a paper by Einstein or something like this and actually read his paper, you find that what the scientists in the day used to do is there used to be speculation. They used to speculate. So they would present their results and do it very carefully and correctly, and then the discussion section at the end would usually lapse into speculation on what things might be like or what they believe. And science has moved away from that. In fact, that's any speculation in a paper is very quickly criticized by reviewers, and they really discourage that type of behavior at this point. So now you get into a situation where, you put a scientist in public and a Q&A session and you ask them, well, what do you think? Well, some of that is speculation, and a careful scientist, is going to say, well, let me speculate, or this is speculation, but very quickly, when this stuff is just released without those nuanced indications, then it can become very problematic.
Right.
And it's also difficult to respond on the fly like that. I think that, when writing a scientific paper, preparing a talk, it really does take you a good period of time to make sure that every statement you're making is correct and is worded to say exactly what you want it to say. I have always called that making your papers bulletproof. I have a colleague in England who calls it making them bomb-proof. I guess he writes better papers than I do. But you really do put the time in to make sure that no one can criticize you for the statements you're making. But when you're being asked questions, in a Q&A session, or during a talk, or a dinner conversation at a table, the situation's very different. It's hard to make careful statements that are going to be immune from criticism.
Mm-hmm. And then also, and like you've said earlier, kind of taken out of context. And one of the perpetrators, the UK tabloids, bless their hearts, not always get the facts straight. They try to sensationalize. And for instance, you've had an experience, and I was wondering how your experience went, where they wrote an article about you and your ideas.
Yes, I had written a piece for an online journal called The Conversation last June or so, a year ago. They had contacted our media department actually and wanted a physicist to write a piece on UFOs, and so I agreed that I would do that. And basically I wrote an opinion piece basically stating that scientists should study these things. That's really all that I said in the paper, and I spent 4 days writing that paper. So I spent a lot of effort in writing it and had it proofread by several of my colleagues before submitting it. And I was and once it was out, I was surprised at how much press it got, and then I was surprised at how you would have articles written about my article. And so despite the fact that I carefully worded things and was very careful in my statements, the articles written about my article were, much more highly speculative and made some statements about what I had said that I didn't really say. For instance, I think one headline was that, former NASA scientist says that government's hiding information on UFOs or something, and I remember one afternoon I just buried my head in my hands and I thought, oh my God, what have I done? I've now learned a very valuable lesson. This is what happens when a scientist steps outside the scientific community and interacts with the public. And I'm sure politicians feel this on a daily basis, but that's the first day that I really felt it. And there's nothing you can do about it. I can't take it back. I can't make a statement to clarify or correct it, and you just have to let it go, which is a tough thing to do.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I can't remember his name. I know it was something like Cosmo, but the scientist who spoke recently at SETI, kind of making the same argument you were making. That it's something that we need to look into, at least to keep an eye. Our
Silvano
yes,
Colombano.
Exactly,
yeah,
exactly.
I worked with him at NASA Ames. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, and then of course he's kind of like shied away from speaking at all in the public because his argument, similar to yours, was completely misconstrued out there, and so much so that he's just like, well, I'm not going to talk to any of you anymore, and that's part of the problem that happens.
Yeah, it is, and it's it's easy to blame the scientists for it, but they're the ones putting their career on the line doing this and putting their reputation on the line. So it's a difficult thing. If you want information from somebody, you have to make them comfortable to tell you.
Yeah, I agree, and I think our goal is going to be, at least with any influence I have, especially being kind of the press guy with the group, we'll default to making the scientists comfortable rather than the public, just because that's who we're trying to get involved and trying to make a safe space for.
Yeah. And I think that if they feel comfortable, they'll tell you. I think most scientists are very excited about the work that they do, and this is what we're interested in. This is what drives us. This is what we think about 24/7. And I think that most scientists are eager to share their thoughts on the topics that interest them. So I think that that'll go a long way.
Mm-hmm. So we've got a break coming up here, and then we will get into what you talked about at the conference, which I find extremely interesting. However, one last question before we go to break is, having said what you said earlier about this kind of avoiding speculation, it is interesting, and I find it really interesting that papers that come out, such as the Tabby Star, it was actually in that original paper that came out where they speculated on the potential intelligent civilization or Dyson sphere hypothesis.
Yeah, that is interesting, and I find that I think that speculation is an important part of science. You're basically considering potential hypotheses, and I think that it's not helpful to stop scientists from speculating. They should be speculating. That's part of what we do, and it's good for us to do that out in the open with other scientists so that there can be a discourse.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thank you so much for that discussion for the first part. We're going to go take a break real quick here. We'll be back in just a few seconds. Those of you listening on a radio station will hear a commercial break. The rest of you will hear a short musical interlude. And once we're back, we'll be back with Professor Kevin Knuth to talk more about UFOs. Welcome back to Open Mind UFO Radio. This is Alejandro Rojas, your host for the show, and I'm talking to Professor Kevin Knuth, and we're actually going to now get into your talk at the AAPC, which was Constraints on Breakaway Societies Engaged in Relativistic Interstellar Travel. And it's funny you use that framework, because I'm not sure if you're aware, but there is a conspiracy theory about breakaway societies. Have you heard about that?
I have heard about that, and I think that's probably where the term originally originated, or just where it originated, and but here I mean something a bit different. So
right, which is really interesting. So I guess to begin with, you had a quote at the beginning of your talk, which I think is important.
Yes, it was a quote from Malov and Matlov's The Starflight Handbook. Basically, it says, "Interstellar travel may still be in its infancy, but adulthood is fast approaching, and our descendants will someday see childhood's end."
So we're really getting close to traveling faster and faster. And I think this graph then that you showed next was really important, kind of outlining how fast have we gone? What speeds have we achieved, and what speeds are we looking at? And you separate two areas. One area in particular you were looking at was the region of extraordinary propulsion. And how would you define that?
Let's see. So that graph I got from a paper by Garcia Escartin and Chamorro Posada from Acta Astronautica, and the paper is called Scouting the Spectrum for Interstellar Travelers. And basically, they designated that region of extraordinary propulsion as being a region that basically is an order of magnitude, a factor of 10 times faster than the fastest objects we've observed, the fastest natural objects we've observed. So the fastest objects we've observed are basically hypervelocity neutron stars that were observed going about 0.5% the speed of light. So 10 times faster than that, you're basically looking at 5% the speed of light as being the region of extraordinary propulsion. Those are basically the speeds you need to achieve to be able to perform interstellar travel to the nearest stars in tens of years, basically.
Mm-hmm. And we're breaching this in that our proposed Orion starship, and I'm assuming this is with the SLS rocket system that we will be kind of at the cusp of those areas of speed.
Well, I think the Orion starship was a nuclear fusion starship, so those were some using nuclear power. I don't think we're quite at that stage yet. I think the fastest the fastest propulsion that's been considered is this basically using a laser to shine onto a small solar sail to accelerate a craft out of the solar system. And so some of this technique's being considered for Breakthrough Starshot, I think it's called, which is a mission. They're intending to send small cell phone sized probes to Alpha Centauri this way. The expected speeds should be up to about 20% the speed of light. So that means you're basically going to get there in about 20-year travel time to Alpha Centauri.
Mm-hmm. And okay, so which just kind of, we're getting close, or at least we're starting to have ideas.
We have ideas and we're trying. So that's the good thing.
Mm-hmm. So and then to speak kind of I guess to move this along to I'll let you kind of bring us there, I guess. To get to your breakaway kind of theory or idea here.
Sure. I had, growing up watching science fiction, you always have your heroes, dash off at warp speed or go through hyperspace, which is effectively faster than light travel, so they can get from one star system to another and in a short period of time. And basically, I like to think of it this way: you want to. It's not a fun science fiction story if it takes them 50 years to get to the star system they want to get to, and then they have to come back, because by the time they come back, it's 100 years later. They're late for dinner, very late for dinner, and so it doesn't make for a good science fiction tale. So a lot of science fiction focuses on faster than light travel. And I think that fact has kind of biased people, even scientists, into believing that the only way to get to the nearest stars is to go faster than light. Now, some scientists, some physicists who've really thought about this would realize, well, wait a minute, you don't have to go faster than light. You can go, as long as you get up to relativistic speeds, you get going some reasonable percentage of the speed of light. You find that relativity works for you. It actually helps you out. In that going very fast, the clocks on the spacecraft will be moving more slowly relative to those in the rest of the galaxy. And so while it may take 100 years for the ship to travel, some distance to the nearest star, it will only, for the travelers, depending on how fast they go, it may only take, a few days to months or whatever. It depends on the speed. So a lot of physicists have realized that using with relativity will work in your favor if you get going close to the speed of light. However, we don't have the technology to do this. There are very serious engineering challenges. The amount of energy required is insane. The fact that you're going to be barreling through space at close to the speed of light, you're going to fly into things. So you need to be able to shield your craft from that. Space isn't empty. You've got about 1 hydrogen atom per cubic meter. And so now when you're traveling at close to relativistic speeds, from the perspective of the traveler, the distances actually get shortened. So the space between you and the star system you're heading to actually shrinks and is compressed. But what that does is that means that these very diffuse hydrogen atoms in space are basically compressed, and so before you know it, you're flying through a wall of hydrogen gas at close to the speed of light, which will tear your ship apart in very short order. So I think most scientists who have realized that you could travel from star to star moving at relativistic speeds, while that physically would work, the engineering challenges are so difficult that it's not really worth considering that. And the other problem is that for those at home, it's still going to take you hundreds of years to do it. So I've actually heard a lot of scientists say, so what's the point? What civilization would do this? And I was reading about that once, and I actually came across that statement. It's even if you can go relativistic speeds, the traveler could traverse those distances, but it would still take years for those at home. So what civilization would ever undertake such a challenge? And I thought, well, it wouldn't be so bad if you were traveling with your friends, because you just would meet up with your friends again, and then you could share information, and so it wouldn't, that would work. And then I realized that you really would have to, if you were an interstellar traveler traveling at relativistic speeds, you would have to abandon this idea of having a home world, because you can't go home again. It's equivalent really to racing ahead into the future. So I imagine that, you can still ask the question, what society would do that? Well, there are societies who just travel. We call them nomads. They're nomadic. And would anybody really do that? Well, you can ask yourself, would anybody really sign up to be part of SpaceX's Mars colony project, a one-way trip to Mars? Yeah, hundreds of people signed up for that. Of course people would sign up for it. People are crazy. They will do all sorts of things. So I thought, well, these societies, you could do this if you were nomadic. This would be really pretty straightforward as long as you had the technology, which would have to overcome those serious engineering challenges. But if you had that technology, then, I could travel off to a star system 30 light years away. You could travel off to another one 30 light years away. We could agree to meet back here in a few months. And for us, it would be a few months later. For everybody back here on Earth, it would be 60 years later. But so what? Who cares? You and I are meeting back, and that was the idea.
Right. So it's so interesting. Space-time nomads is what you call them. And
right.
You have this picture of, which I think is a perfect picture because it's what I envisioned too when you first said it. is it Battlestar Galactica, that armada, where they were... It was the same thing. Right. They were a breakaway society looking for somewhere to live, whereas what you're talking about is more of a society going to be, I guess, committed to exploration.
Right.
And even though... Yeah, because they would be on their own. If they left Earth at these tremendous speeds and then came back, they may have gone to Alpha Centauri and back. And in their time, it only was a couple years, but in our time, it was hundreds of years. And so that's why they would be, once they left, they're saying goodbye to the rest of civilization.
That's right. Yep.
Really?
Yeah, and it's kind of stunned me when I started working the numbers. I was really surprised. I realized that, wow, if you traveled at 100, well, if you traveled at a 1g acceleration, which is the acceleration of gravity, and you could maintain that acceleration, you could get across the galaxy in about 20 years, your time. And I thought, wow, that's actually much better than plans that I've heard on getting to Alpha Centauri. So I was rather surprised that you could traverse those great distances that quickly. Now, of course, going from one side of the galaxy to the other, it's going to, for everybody on Earth, it'll take 80,000 years for us to get there, at a 1g acceleration. And a 1g acceleration will put you into speeds well above 99% the speed of light. So you'll be going very relativistic at that point.
Yeah, it's a really interesting idea. And what you've put together, like, it seems like the precision would have to be very accurate. So, because one thing you've proposed is that this large group, let's say a Battlestar Galactica type armada, could head out, and then some decide to go explore one area, some explore another, and then they have these meetup points. But
right.
Do they have to be extremely precise, like to the second or even more?
They'd have to be relatively precise. You would have to have, you'd require some dwell time in the system that you're visiting, to make meetups more probable. So these either would have to be planned well in advance, or you'd have to come up with a strategy for creating a network of traveling paths such that the distances are commensurate, and you'll end up meeting every now and again in certain places. So I basically started modeling this to see what type of constraints that would put on the topology of the traveler's network. And so I'm still working on this to see how this could work.
But it's pretty cool. You have this video where you show at least one network that you modeled where, these craft kind of all head out from one point and head out to where they're exploring, and then also head back to meetup points and such.
Right. Yeah. So in that example, I just had them travel to a location and then like a caravan to a location, and then the caravan would split up to other locations and continue, kind of like a tree graph. And at every point they could either travel to a new destination or go back to an old one. And I ran that simulation for 2,030 years of time in the galaxy, and just to see how this would work for the travelers. The amount of time that the travelers experienced ranged from about 8 months to 2 years. So it kind of surprised me that you don't have that much dispersion in time, even over a 2,000-year time period in the galaxy. And if they were a little more careful about what star systems they visited and the distances that they traveled, they don't need to travel in straight lines. They could arc slightly to increase the path length. If they made those path lengths commensurate, then you'd increase the probability of meetups, which would work.
Now, there's a danger if you're late to a meetup, or if you have a breakdown, you're you're out of the network. I mean,
yeah. If you're late, you can hopefully catch up with somebody at another meetup, at some other point in another system at another time. That would be good. A breakdown would be very bad. So I'd imagine that you'd probably travel in caravans rather than individually. Traveling as an individual would be extremely dangerous. If you break down, you're you are likely not to see anybody, from your society for another, hundreds of thousands of years. So you can't just sit around and wait for somebody to help you.
Mm-hmm.
It would depend on the density of travelers in the network as well. So depending on how many travelers there are, if you're not traveling in a caravan, would tell you how often new travelers arrive at a destination. So all these are basically parameters in the models that would describe how a society like this would behave.
Mm-hmm. And an interesting, you bring up some points. So, for instance, that one of the things that we saw at the conference was this estimation of what speeds, the object at the 2004 Nimitz encounter might have been achieving, given the observations of the pilot, David Fravor, and others. So those are extreme speeds. Those are potential evidence that there might be somebody out there who's been able to figure out this sort of thing out. And they could be doing what you're talking about. And if they are, it leads to an interesting perspective on their side, which would, for instance, as you put it, make it so there's no reason to make friends with the locals.
Right. Yeah, basically I had to get some idea of what speeds you might see. I basically estimated some of the accelerations in some of these cases, including the Nimitz case that Robert Powell and Peter Reali looked at. And I found the accelerations basically ranging from hundreds of Gs of acceleration to 2,000 plus Gs of acceleration. So I think in my models that I used about 100 G acceleration. And with, if these craft could sustain that kind of acceleration for a period of time, then if you accelerated from the sun to your destination, and if you accelerate halfway and then decelerate at that rate the other half of the way, you could literally traverse the galaxy in about 120 days of ship time. So less than 4 months of travel time to get from one side of the galaxy to the other, which I thought would be really amazing. So I took that as evidence, so the people often ask the question, with these craft, why do people quickly assume that they're spacecraft? And I think the answer is because the accelerations are what you would expect to see in a spacecraft. And in fact, this wouldn't be just the ones we saw that were encountered in the Nimitz case. They wouldn't just be just any ordinary spacecraft. They'd be excellent spacecraft. So I think that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Now and then again, so the point is that if you're traveling from one side of the galaxy to the other, or even just a few hundred light years, there's really no reason to make friends with the locals, because the next time you're here visiting, that civilization you visited last time you were here could potentially be gone. So if you, for instance, if you're traversing the galaxy, it's going to take you 80,000 years to get from one side to the other. That's 160,000 years. So an individual who visited Earth and then went to the other side of the galaxy and came back at present day, that means the last time they were here on Earth was 160,000 years ago. Well, there were no people here then. So there were no society. There were people, but there were no societies. And if they intend to make another trip like that, they won't be back again for 160,000 years. So why bother landing on the White House lawn? There isn't going to be a White House the next time they come back.
Right. And another point you made was that, there has been talk about the similarity in what people have witnessed, back in the 40s to what they witness now. Well, in this scenario that you put forth, even though, something was seen in the 40s and then seen again in the 2000s, it, could have gone somewhere and come back. And to that craft, it's only been maybe last time it was here was lunch, and now it's the afternoon. So it's the same craft.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's one thing that really surprised me, because in that simulation I ran it for 2,000 years, and it was only anywhere from 8 months to 2 years for those individual craft. So if you imagine, there were sightings of flying shields in ancient Rome, And if we would assume that those shields were actually one of these spacecraft, then it could actually be the same individuals in the same spacecraft that came back a second time, in present day. And the last time they were here was 2 millennia ago. That's very possible. Mm-hmm. And so why don't the craft change design? Why don't they improve? Why don't you see technological improvements in these craft? Well, because they're the same craft. That would be the answer in this case, which I thought was pretty surprising, but it would make some kind of sense.
Mm-hmm. And then a unique opportunity you talk about to kind of observe evolution.
Yeah, that I thought was really exciting, and I then thought, wow, what if I traversed the galaxy? If I went and did this, I would have, every trip across the galaxy, every round trip I'd take would be 160,000 years so of time in the galaxy. So if I in a 50-year lifespan, I could conceivably traverse the galaxy 150 times. And that would be equivalent to racing ahead about 12 million years into the future.
Wow.
So it would be very interesting because you could literally watch, 12 million years of evolution happen on a planet, at some sparse interval, 150,000 year intervals, which would be really interesting. I mean, their biologists would be looking at biology at a very different scale than we study biology. And I think that's, they would be studying biology like paleontologists study biology. So you would have the opportunity to watch evolution at work. And heck, you could experiment with it if you wanted to. And I think that's an interesting possibility as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what really hits me about your discussion and this idea also is that we're not, especially when you look at your original graph with the speeds we're looking to achieve in the fairly near, well, at least ideas that we think we can build craft that can move at certain speeds. The potential exists for the not too distant future, and I would imagine, just like you talked about, people willing to go to Mars on this one-way trip, it's very realistic that there could be a group of people that decide to do this. And,
yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and spend their life gathering amazing information, taking a planet and observing its evolution. I mean, it's pretty extraordinary.
Yeah, if I didn't have a family, you could sign me up. Mm-hmm. So there it is.
Well, this is really interesting. I know that there will be more information up about your talk on the SCU site eventually, but I do want to say thank you very much for participating. And, as far as the future goes, do you think that there is people interested in this topic? Do you think there's hope? Do you see like kind of a positive movement in the scientific community to at least begin to be open to speculation in this area?
I do. I was nervous about the article that I wrote for the conversation where I basically said that we should be studying these phenomena. And I was worried about what kind of backlash or commentary I would get from other scientists. And I was very surprised to see that I got a good number of emails from other scientists, and the responses were all positive. They were all, bravo, somebody's needed to say this for a long time. We've needed to study these things for a long time. It's been, 50 or 70 years, and nobody's really looked at this seriously, and we ought to. And those were basically the kinds of comments that I got. I got comments like that, ranging from that to I've been studying this in secret for this many years, and I have images of plasma around these objects that I'm trying to study, and I'm and things like this. We should get together and compare notes, and I'll show you what I know. And so I had a lot of people very interested, and so I'm hoping that a scientific conference like SCU's would be is going to grow in size, and you'll see more scientists the next time around.
Mm-hmm. And do you know, did you hear any feedback from that Harvard professor? Do you think you influenced him at all? Avi Loeb, I believe his name is.
Oh, Avi Loeb. Yeah, I don't know him personally, and I didn't have any feedback from him. I don't know if my article influenced him at all, or if it's just a sign of the times. I think that the Luis Elizondo coming out with the announcement about ATIP was a big deal, and I think it'll be a bigger deal after May. And I think that people are realizing that, our government's been studying these things for a long time, and they continue to study them. I think that'll be it will be a revelation to some, and the fact is other governments studying them as well, and that may induce some governments of some of these other countries to come out and say, yeah, no, we've studied these things too, and I'm hoping that scientists will get involved and we can start figuring out what these things are. And in some cases, they may be natural phenomena that are worth learning about, and in other cases, they might be artificial, made by somebody else, maybe not, maybe extraterrestrial. That's interesting too. So, if I look at it this way, if there were extraterrestrial craft visiting Earth, we would all want to know about it. We all ought to know about it. So it's worth looking into, and it's worth studying.
Well, thank you so much for joining me this morning, or afternoon for you, I guess, out there on the East Coast. But thank you so much for joining. This has been so very interesting, and I look forward to one day having you back.
All right. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much to Kevin for being on the show. It was so great to have him. I guess you could Google his name and also look him up at at Albany State University of New York, and to read more about him. But he's got a lot of really cool stuff going on. Of course, in the science world, he's doing lots of cool stuff as well. The lecture that he did for the Scientific Coalition for Ufology at this event, this AAPC event, was great. So we kind of covered, generalized what he was talking about, but I can't wait for you to see the full presentation. He said he did permission for the SCU to post that. So keep an eye at explorescu.org. And it looks like they're going to be putting the videos up in the AAPC link. So you can see that there. And they've got pictures from the event of all of the presenters, and it looks like that's where they're going to put the videos as well. So very excited for you all to see that, because there were just some incredible lectures, including Kevin's here. And actually, there were funnier jokes in the presentation too. Kevin is just absolutely a ton of fun to listen to, and his lecture was a lot of fun. So really happy to have him involved in, and thankful that we have someone of his stature and background, to be here to answer questions and to speculate and give us some educated ideas on some things that could be going on out there. I think that one of the things I really love about his talk is this perspective thing, that if time is much different to whatever may be coming here, if there is something coming here, then that may explain some of their enigmatic behavior and or motivations, and that we haven't really taken a lot of that into consideration, I don't think. So really interesting to hear him talk on that. Also, congratulations to the SCU for putting together an event that I think is one of the most important ones to have been put together on all of this. So great job to them. Be sure to check out explorescu.org for the official releases of information. And as Kevin talked about, control and making sure that information is released properly, and of course that all of the proper permissions are obtained, are very, very important to scientists. So you'll be able to find the official releases of information at explorescu.com. By the way, if you're interested in helping out the Scientific Coalition for Ufology, there are a couple positions they're looking for. I actually am helping out, my aspect is as an advisor when it comes to the press and communications and things like that. And to that effect, one of the things we're looking at least for internal communications, is someone who can help with that, help with maybe sending out emails, but even more so, being in the board meetings and taking notes and sharing that information internally as well. So this is kind of an internal information gathering and sharing responsibility. But what's great about this is that this position is going to be able to keep up to speed on all of the really cool things that SCU is looking to do. What are they looking to do? Really, they obtain entries, essentially, white papers, investigations that people have done out there, and then they reveal them like a scientific organization would do to make sure that the science is vetted, it's good science, good research, and then those are posted. Really, there's only a couple papers that have been out there, but there are some in the mix as well that are under review currently. So we're going to see really good stuff coming from this group going forward. And already you can click on a link called Papers, and you're going to see a lot of case reports, science papers. Not all of these are SCU papers, but papers that have been written in the past that are scientific papers. So this is kind of going to be a repository for everybody on scientific analysis and information regarding this topic. So really good stuff, but these guys did a great job. So if you're interested in helping on doing some of that internal communications, get a hold of me. You can send an email to paranormalreporter@gmail.com. Also, you can go to my Facebook or my Twitter. Just look for Alejandro Rojas. If you type Alejandro Rojas UFOs, you're going to find me. So yeah, send me a message and we'll get you rolling on that. Thank you very much for your interest. And thanks for meeting some of you guys at SCU, some of my listeners, because my listeners are extremely intelligent. Although not all of you have PhDs, you all should, and you could if you wanted to. You know, if you had the time, you could do it. You guys are like super geniuses. But it was great to have so many listeners there and to be able to meet some of you. So that was a lot of fun. And in fact, I wanted to do some shout outs. Kevin, who I met, that's the name of someone I met. I met a lot of people. But in particular, I want to say hello and thank you to some of my patrons. So I want to say thank you to Amy, to Andrew, to David, to Evan, to Gary, Guillaume, James, Jason, Joseph, Kendra, Kevin, Layla, let's see who else, Les, it may be Layla, Richard, Ron, and Ryan. And let's see, there's a couple more. Stuart, thank you all so much to, patrons new and old for helping me with what I do at the Patreon website. It's a ton of help. It's greatly appreciated. And if you are a Patreon member, you can go there and see more information as well and contact me on there. And I do share some secret information there. In fact, with my Patreons, I kind of shared more information about what I'm up to and what I'm going to be doing in the future. So you can go check that out there if you're a patron. Otherwise, just listen to the show. I'll share that information with you either way. More information getting shared with you is about the UFO Congress. So if you were getting the Open Minds newsletters, we have been in this transition for email. So the email server we have is not working. That's why I didn't say send an email to contact@openminds.com. Instead, I've been trying to work with that, but the UFO Congress has got their email system up, and it's kind of a lot of the people that were on the, really it was hard to tell the difference because the Congress and Open Minds were combined, and now the Congress is just separate. So you may get emails from the UFO Congress. Please don't hit the junk mail if you don't want those emails. If you don't want them, that is just fine. I totally understand. But do hit the unsubscribe button, and you will be unsubscribed. Don't hit that junk mail one. That hurts us. But I would really recommend that you stay on the email list because you're going to get the latest information that we're sharing right on that list. So you're going to get Open Minds information about this podcast, information about the conference itself, and we have a lot of great speakers coming up to the conference. I'll tell you, Lou is going to be there, and a lot of things related to what Lou is up to. So for a little hint on some of the great speakers. Speaking of which, of course, one of the big things Lou Elizondo is up to with To the Stars Academy and Tom DeLong and that whole group, working with Lou Elizondo, the former chief of that Pentagon UFO project, who spoke at the SCU, is his History Channel show that they have coming up called Unidentified. And it's going to be really important. Lou says he's seen some episodes they're really good, what he's seen so far, that they're working with very professional people. This is some of what he shared at the conference. Of course, I'm going to have an interview with him in just the next few weeks where we'll talk about more of all of this. But he did share with us that much of what he couldn't share is going to be in the show. So, for example, the Nimitz case is incredible, and it's just an extraordinary case. We've talked a lot about it. The 2004 case, it was in the New York Times article that, kind of released the information on Elizondo and the Pentagon program. You'll see more about that, too, when you see the video of the SCU analysis on that. But you will also see on the television show even more cases that the Pentagon project worked on and witnesses from these events as well. So finally, what we've all been waiting for, what we've all been hoping for, is going to be in this History Channel project program that's coming up here. So really exciting. That show starts up in May, and we should have Lou on before that to tell us even more. So that'll be really exciting as well. So otherwise, check out openminds.tv. All of those stories that Martin and I spoke about at the beginning of the program, I have listed on the front page there under the UFO headlines. Also, check out ufocongress.com for updates. We'll be opening tickets and putting up speaker lists soon. Also, at ufocongress.com, there's a store with a bunch of really cool UFO and alien products that you'll want to check out. So if you're into that sort of thing, wearing those clothes and stuff, they're super cool. So check out the store there. Otherwise, I want to thank Martin Willis of Podcast UFO for joining us at the beginning of the show. I want to thank Systematics for the bumper music, Caleb Hanks for the amazing open and close music, and finally, of course, I want to thank you, the listener, for being here once again. Thank you for hanging in there. It's been a few weeks since we've had a show, but we're going to be back rolling. We'll have another great show next week and a bunch of incredible shows coming up. We're kind of got a new era, I feel, like moving in a more credible and important direction with this topic than we've ever done before. So we'll probably have some slight changes coming in and just kind of bringing everything to a better and higher level. So this is all going to be a lot of fun, and it's going to be fun having you all along on this journey as well. So thank you all so much for listening. Until next time, adios, muchachos.